without further ado, I think I'm just going to do a little bit housekeeping stuff before. So thank you everyone for coming here today. So a little bit housekeeping thing first. This event is going to be webcast live and also recorded. The recording is going to be placed on ARB's and also the program websites. And also outside of this auditorium, past the green chandelier, if you make a left turn, on your right-hand side, there's restrooms and also a drinking fountain. In case of a fire drill or a real fire or something that we need a building evacuation, please calmly take the stairs and go down to the first floor, exit the building, and go to the Cesar Chavez Park for gathering. And I hope that everybody got your name tag already. Okay, this name tag is your pass to the reception this tonight. So, Michael, do you want to talk a little bit about the reception? Come. Because we want to give people a little bit time, because we still have some people here in the lobby. So while we're waiting for people to come in, Michael is going to be talking a little bit about the reception.
All right, folks. So there's not a whole lot to say about the reception. It starts tonight at 5:30, runs through 7:30. We're going to be at 720 K Street at a wine bar called Ballerine Cellars. This event will be hosted by the California Transit Association in partnership with BAE Systems. We hope to see you there. As Yao-Chun mentioned, your name tag today will be your ticket in. And once there, you'll get some tickets for some wine, and there will be charcuterie boards out there for some light appetizers. So thank you. Hope to see you there.
So without further ado, I'm going to hand this over to Richard.
You think I know how to operate the mics here? All right, good morning. Really good to be here, and really it's a welcome to the 2019 Zero-Emission Bus Technology Symposium and Showcase. So really good opportunity for us to have an exchange here. And really, I really wanted to open with recognizing the transit agencies. We really see the agencies as key partners, and the partnership is key to effectively moving forward. And if I think about the role that transit agencies play in clean air, addressing climate change, providing a critical service and enhanced mobility, and really speaking to a number of the challenges we have with VMT and transportation-related emissions, the partnership and support is going to be key to our ultimate success as a state and an agency, and ultimately on the behalf of the citizens of the state. So we're looking very forward to this conversation over the next 2 days. I think it's critically important. And I have a few folks that we and I want to recognize, because these don't come together by accident. They come together because of partnerships, and they come together because of collaboration. And if there's a theme that's going to play itself out over the next few days, it is collaboration. We have some challenges in front of us, no doubt. The way we're going to effectively deal with them is through identifying what those are and partnering and effectively working through those challenges and breaking through them. So in terms of recognition, I want to recognize really that not only the forward nature of this event, but really the forward-looking and progressive transit agency, Antelope Valley Transit Authority, who's been a long-term partner, a leader, and a champion in deploying zero-emission buses in California. And I'd in particularly like to point out two gentlemen with us today who are responsible for the leaps and bounds that Antelope Valley has made to become 100% zero emission this year, 100%. That's Mr. Len Engel, the retired general manager of Antelope Valley, and Mr. Macy Nashadi, the general manager. If both of you could stand. Virtually, they're standing right now. So I really want to thank them and for their forward work and moving us forward, and their example and work with the state, the bus manufacturers, technology providers, utilities has really been helpful. It's been instrumental identifying and taking on some of the barriers. I also want to acknowledge, though, the other transit agencies. We have many, many other transit agencies that have been key leaders, and they're present. Many of them are present here today. AC Transit, Sunline Transit, Foothill, San Joaquin Regional Transit District, and many others have been key. They've been key to getting us to where we are and will be partnering with us as we go forward. And that leadership is going to be, progressively more important as we look at the challenges the state's facing. And I just touched on a few of them. Touched on air quality, touched on climate, touched on equity, mobility, and access, particularly for lower income folks, even more so. I also want to thank the California Transit Association for co-hosting this symposium and being a partner and being a strong advocate for California transit agencies. The association has been actively engaged with us on making regulations and policies that shape the future of our transit systems, including promoting clean, sustainable transportation and advocating for funds that support and advance them. And today we also want to give special thanks to the Shenzhen Bus Group that came from China to share their experiences on deploying more than 16,000 zero-emission buses in 2017. 16,000. And we really appreciate they're here with us, as they had to fly out yesterday, which was the Chinese New Year, while they're supposed to be with family and friends. So welcome, Shenzhen Bus Group, and happy Chinese New Year. So California's efforts to meet health-based air quality standards, address community needs, and fight climate change require holistic and comprehensive suite of measures to reduce emissions. There's not a single solution, we know that. Zero-emission technologies are an important part of this integrated approach. Zero-emission buses provide the cleanest technologies available to Californians, especially those low-income and transit-dependent riders. But beyond this, transitioning to zero-emission bus technology sends a clear message for electrification of heavy-duty vehicle sector and California's commitment to health and the environment. These technological advances, combined with robust and sustainable public transit, are key to accomplishing California's transportation and air quality goals. We have many opportunities available, but no doubt we have a lot of work to do. We all know the transition to a zero-emission bus fleet, as I just noted, it's not going to happen overnight. We have a lot of work to do. And addressing some of the challenges is going to require more than strong planning and commitment from transit agencies. It's going to require a comprehensive approach, legislative support of other agencies, and funding. And we're committed to work hand in hand to support the transit agencies in overcoming barriers as we work through this transition. So today, by bringing together transit agencies, our sister agencies, technology providers, infrastructure providers, workforce training providers, and utilities to share their expertise, lessons learned, and formulate solutions, we build on these strong working relationships that will be so critical to all of us. This symposium is really a good first step, but we have, as I noted, much more work to do. We plan to work with you on updates to our board as one example, and annual updates to our board in terms of progress. How are we moving forward with the transit agencies, buses, numbers of buses, funding, so we can lay all that out on an annual basis and be very clear how we're proceeding and how the transition is unfolding. This is also an important opportunity for CARB to team up with the California Transportation Agency to strategize the best utilization of funding, resources, and planning to provide transit agencies tools for cleaner, more efficient, and broader public transportation. To that end, we're fortunate to have Mr. Brian Annis with us today, the Secretary of California State Transportation Agency, to provide some insights about the state's transportation goals, programs, and related resources. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Brian. Brian.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here. And I want to thank Richard and the Air Resources Board for hosting this event. Richard went through a list of many other contributors to this event, so I won't repeat that. But thanks to all of you that are participating and sharing your best practices, sharing some of the new opportunities we have. You know, one thing that we're very happy about as we look back over the past 4 or 5 years is we've been able to partner closely at the Transportation Agency with the Air Resources Board on some new funding programs. And in fact, they're very substantive funding programs. You know, we have through the cap and trade programs and through the Senate Bill 1 programs, by my count, I think over $1 billion a year in new money that's going into the transit sector. And that's a bit of a minimum, if you will, because there's other competitive programs that transit also competes for and wins funding for. So we're very happy to have this new foundation of funding, but clearly the funding by itself, while necessary, is not sufficient to meet all of our goals. And I think, you know, one of the things that today will help us move on is how to do transit smarter, how to do it better, and you know, achieve better results for the increased resources we now have. I wanted to focus a little bit on a couple of our funding programs first before I talk about how we might improve some of our work. You know, the largest one that's been established first with our cap and trade funds is this competitive program called the Transit Intercity Rail Capital Program. And I know several of you out there have received grants through that program. And what's exciting about that one is it's so large that we can do very big things. And the count so far with that program is through 3 cycles, we've funded over 56 projects valued at over $5 billion. So that's clearly a very big commitment to transit and making transit better. To highlight some of the areas that program funds, we fund those big rail expansion projects, but we've also focused all along on zero-emission bus technologies as well, and bus rapid transit, ways to make transit better. Just to give you a sense, in our last round, which was 2018, we've funded over 250 zero-emission bus purchases. Sometimes that's contributing funding, but you know, that's very large amount, and it really goes from urban to rural, from north to south. For the largest single recipient was City of Los Angeles DOT, and they received $36 million to buy 112 zero-emission buses. But again, it's not just the big urban transit agencies. In the North State, Shasta Regional Transportation Agency received $8.6 million to buy 7 buses that are zero emission as well for long distance service to connect to the Sacramento region. So it's very exciting to have the funding. We're on the zero emission area. We're also starting to dip our foot into the waters on the rail side, and we're excited to be working with San Bernardino County Transportation Authority as they look to, as they're purchasing some diesel multiple units. Some manufacturers of that technology offer other power units, so you can have battery powered, and you can have hydrogen powered or fuel cells. So we're happy that we're experimenting some in a pilot with what'll be the Redlands Rail down in San Bernardino to have some zero emission trains running. Many of you, I think all transit agencies are receiving some formula funds, which is very important. You know, you have these big competitive programs that some recipients get, but it's nice to have this base of money that every transit agency gets through a formula program, and we have several of those. We've historically had the state transit assistance funding, but first with cap and trade in 2014, we were able to augment that with the low carbon transit operations program. And with SB1, now we have several funding programs that go to transit agencies by formula. There's a state of good repair pot, and there's sort of a supplemental state transit assistance. So again, we've established a very strong foundation to help us invest more, and that's leading to newer equipment, that's leading to increased service, and that's leading to more frequent service, and we're hoping over time to see that transit ridership reverse course that we've seen in the most recent years and start to grow again. And I think that idea of reversing some of the declines we've seen, especially in bus transit, really gets to how we do things smarter and better in the future. And one of the things to highlight that I'm excited about at the State Transportation Agency is we've been working on a integrated transit vision and you know, looking at around the world what models work well, because in California, as this room demonstrates, we have many transit providers, and integrated transit is the vision of seamless travel across multiple transportation modes, be they rail, light rail, bus, private providers, which will better serve customers and utilize our transit assets. So again, proud that CalSTA's kicked this off. We worked with Capital Corridor Rail on a grant they received through the Transit Intercity Rail program, but with them, we're working to establish this integrated model that, as I said, works well in several other countries like Hong Kong, Japan, Germany, United Kingdom. You know, they've been able to merge some of the transit services to better serve customers. And the next step of this is getting that pilot going. It involves integrated travel planning, fare payment, and we'll have a pilot group of the willing that's going to look at this, starting with our 3 intercity rail providers, looking at the 5 commuter rail providers, and then partnering with some of our local bus or light rail providers to see how this concept can work and grow ridership. You know, again, we're just at in some ways very much still at the beginning, but we have this great foundation built. You know, I want to really compliment Richard and the ARB, because I just see great progress over these past 4 or 5 years, you know, establishing programs that I think are very effective on providing funding to transit, looking at new technologies such as the zero-emission vehicles. And in fact, we had established this largest program, the Transit Intercity Rail program, with the cap and trade funds, but we felt it was working so well when the SB1 discussion started. We said, we don't need a new program. We just need to grow the program we have, and just happy that's we were able to do that. So I want to, again, welcome you. I hope this symposium will provide everyone with valuable information on zero-emission transit buses, information on zero-emission technologies, deployment planning, and funding sources, opportunities to work with the state on that. So again, thank you very much for being here, and I hope you all have a very productive day.
We're getting ready for session 1, how to start a zero-emission bus fleet.
Yeah, that's great. Good morning, everyone. Hear me? All right. My name's Steve Claremont. I'm the Director of Planning and Environment. Okay, Jamie, I'll use the microphone. Oh, here's it. Whatever, Jamie. Steve Claremont, Center for Transportation and the Environment. We're an organization that helps fleets plan and deploy their transition to zero-emission vehicles. Before we get started, how many of you out there are with a transit agency? All right, we got a good crowd. So of you, transit agencies, how many have not yet deployed a zero-emission bus? All right, well, great having you here today. I think we have an amazing panel this morning. We have the superstars of zero-emission bus deployments with having AC Transit, Foothill, and AVTA here. These transit agencies were among the first to deploy zero-emission vehicles, zero-emission buses, and we also have a good mixture of zero-emission buses with this group, including hydrogen fuel cell, depot charged battery electric, overhead charged battery electric, and inductively charged battery electric. So a really good mix of technologies. So not only did they start out with very early deployments, they've also expanded, are currently expanding on their zero-emission bus deployment. So this is a very positive sign that the technology works and everyone's making inroads in here. Let's see. Let's click this forward. So real quickly, just to introduce our panel, we have Norm Hickling, Director of Strategic Planning and Development for AVTA. We got Sal Yamas, Chief Operating Officer for AC Transit. Kevin Parks McDonald, Deputy Executive Director of Foothill Transit. Simon Horton, Senior Project Manager for Southern Cal Edison. And Bill Zobel, VP for Market Development and Strategy for Trillium. Just a couple quick slides about where the ZEB market is going and where it's been. These are awards in the blue line and sales in the blue line and deliveries in the green line. So as we can see nationwide through August, so as we can see, we're starting to get that hockey stick effect here. This market is taking off, which is a very, very positive sign. The gap between the two lines just represent there's about a year and a half to 2 years from the time an agency wins an award, say like a Lono award, to the time they're actually deploying buses. And that's just kind of the nature of the industry right now. But it's a really, really exciting times to be here. And it's not just in California. So most buses have been sold in California so far, but there's interest nationwide, and there have been awards made in almost every state in the country for zero-emission buses. Now, of course, everyone's always been concerned about range or heard about the range anxiety, and why are battery electric buses range limited? And it comes down to just simple science here. So your average diesel bus, let's say it holds about 100 gallons of diesel fuel on it. Well, that's 100 gallons of diesel fuel is about equal to, for a battery electric bus, is equal to about 12 gallons on a battery electric bus for a 450 kilowatt hour pack. So there's a significant difference. Now you can see why you're just not carrying as much energy on that bus as you might normally. Now the good news is that a battery electric bus is 4 times as efficient as a diesel bus. So for that same 12-gallon equivalent of diesel, you're getting the impact of about 48 gallons. So it's a tremendous amount of efficiency savings, and this is part of the reason why we're going in this direction. Just one more note about the challenge between battery electric and fuel cell is the infrastructure. So conceptually, on a per bus basis, the more you scale up on battery electric, we believe it's going to become a little bit more expensive, because it's not just installing one charger or a couple chargers in the corner of your yard. You're now having to deal with a lot more infrastructure, especially in space-constrained yards out there, which becomes on a per bus basis more expensive. Whereas fuel cell buses, on the other hand, the initial investment into all that fueling infrastructure is very expensive, and that's why you don't really see that many fuel cell bus projects out there. However, over time, that investment can be leveraged over more buses. So on a per bus basis over time, we envision that'll be less. Now, we don't know where the lines will cross. We don't know where, if you have a mixed fleet, where it actually pans out. So this is more a conceptual view of where things might be. With that, we will get into our panel. These are some of the questions that you may be asking yourself if you are just starting out or doing your planning on a pilot project, or if you're planning to take where you are right now with your vehicles and going to a full transition plan. But hopefully these are some of the questions we can get addressed today, and we'll also have time for your questions for the panel. All right, we'll turn it over to Norm.
Well, thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here. And if I may, just take a real quick second to introduce some of my colleagues that are here. We have Martin Tompkins, who is our general manager from TransDev. He operates our buses. We have our grants administrator and director of finance, Judy Carl Fry. She's with us. And then Mr. Amazing, Mark Perry, he is the gentleman that actually drove our AVTA bus all the way from Lancaster all the way to here to Sacramento on like 1.2 charges. Okay, so he was 9 miles short from making it, but he almost ran the heater, but he tried not to. So, but he got over 360 miles with that single charge. So that shows you the efficiency of that, and that all came up straight up to 5, et cetera. So it was quite an extraordinary feat. Our journey at Antelope Valley Transit Authority has been going on for 5 years. We started back in the 2014 timeframe. A lot of things came together for us. First of all, we have a very progressive city in policymakers in the Lancaster-Palmdale area who were starting to look at different things, such as the health indexes out there. In the northern Los Angeles County, we in the Antelope Valley always rated very high for respiratory problems and anything to do with air quality and those types of matters. And so this was becoming a major concern and had been a concern. We had a city in the city of Lancaster that had made a very strong commitment that they were going to be a net zero city. They were going to create more energy out of renewable resources and then what they actually use as a city. They are working on that path. So you can see the mindset was starting to work towards renewable energies and becoming much more sustainable, a much more healthier community. We also started looking at the fact that we wanted to change our fleet. I happened to be, they had the honor when I was working for the county supervisor to actually be the chairman of the board at that time for Antelope Valley Transit Authority, and we were able to start looking at some really good things. And then, of course, we had a bus manufacturer come to town, and so all these things came together. It was quite extraordinary, and we really started talking about why buy the old style buses, the old technology? Let's start looking at the new technology, and we wanted to see what was out there. So that really got the board together to start making those decisions. And we were fortunate that Supervisor Mike Antonovich supported the fact of going out and creating a demonstration project. So we were able to buy the very first 2 BYD buses with local county money that came off the line in the Lancaster plant. And we were able to use those for a period of time as a demonstration project. We were concerned about the heat. As you know, the desert gets hot. It's not unusual for us to have a 115-degree day. We also have cold, like Sacramento mornings around here. We do get cold. We do get snow. Mark drove through it yesterday. We also have a lot of wind. We have some dust. And so all those things, we wanted to make sure that this new technology, the battery electric, all the concerns that we would have could be handled by these buses. And they proved out to be extraordinarily good for us. So the board in the February of 2016 timeframe, I think I said November or February of 2014, but it was November of 2014 that we started the demonstration. February of 2016, the Antelope Valley board, Antelope Valley Transit Authority board, they went ahead and said, this is what we want to do. They had put out a procurement and they awarded a contract to BYD for up to 85 buses, which would be the entire 100% transition of our fleet. We were not going to go any other technology. We were going to completely transition the fleet. And you can see the breakdown of the types of buses. We right now have 35. A little while ago, I told somebody 33, but we now have 35 buses on site. We have another 14 that are going to be coming and be delivered to AVTA within the next 60 days or so. All this was going on, and we have been going on. At the same time, we were able to accomplish a depot charging facility that can charge up to 89 buses at the same time. They don't all get charged at the same rate. Obviously, there's a monitoring system that has to go on. That was one of the big challenges that we had. We had several starts and stops and starts and stops, because as we learned how to operate these buses, as we learned what the demands of the buses were going to be, how long it would take to charge them, the design of the depot charging had to change. And that was a year-long process, 13-month-long process. But we're there, it's done, it's ready to go. So we're really proud of that. And we did it for $5 million. We're in the process right now of doing our en-route charging stations. Those are, we're using Wave Technologies. I see Mike Mescalar back there. Thank you, Mike. And it's also given us the ability to really look at our whole planning structure as to where we want to put these en-route charging facilities, because we want to make sure that when we put those into the ground, that they're good for 20 years, that they're going to be and serve our employers, our healthcare providers, and all the places where people want to go for the next 20 years and serve our routes. So that's where we're at, and I'm sure there'll be more questions as we go. But that's our journey, and it's been a good one to this point.
Great. Thank you, Norm. Sal.
Hey, good morning. Check. There we go. Good morning, everybody. First of all, I want to say that I'm really honored to be here representing AC Transit amongst these distinguished guests, and congratulations. That's a major accomplishment, and it's good to see that someone is getting out there on mass deployment, because I think this technology needs that type of demonstration. But so AC Transit has been in the zero-emission bus journey for quite a while. Really all started back in the early 2000s, thanks to the ARB for nudging the industry once again, kicking off an initiative to try alternative fuels, and AC Transit, along with a coalition of other local transit operators, decided to go the alternative fuel path, and we got interested in hydrogen. At that time, the hydrogen was the only viable solution that would provide a range for a electric propelled vehicle. And we started with a 30-foot Thor bus that was originally designed and built for Sunline Transit, another one of our partners that we hold dearly to our heart as we go along this journey. We learned a lot from each other. And that was just the exploratory bus where we started to learn what the technology can do, start thinking of ideas of how we can fuel the bus, what kind of station would we need. And in 2006, we purchased 3 of the first generation hydrogen fuel cell vehicles that we operate today. It's a 40-foot Van Hool bus. And we ran that bus for about 3 years, 4 years actually, and we learned a lot. We learned, not only did we learn, but the OEM also learned on the design specs. That vehicle we realized had too much energy, a little too heavy, and when we went and decided to do the advanced demonstration project, we purchased 12 hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, same manufacturer. We learned they redesigned a lot of the components on the vehicle. They dropped the weight by 5,000 pounds. They changed the fuel cell was actually the same. The energy storage on the bus changed, some other configurations. And that journey really launched us into understanding more of how this technology can really be applied in a day-to-day, any route, any public service application. I want to thank actually some of the staff members we have in the audience here, Stuart Hoffman, who is our technical services manager, and then Jose Vega, who is our zero-emission bus trainer, and probably the industry expert, in my opinion, in the world that can really understand these vehicles. And the reason I say that is we experienced a unique situation where midway through the deployment of these 12 buses, the original manufacturer of the fuel cell did no longer wanted to pursue a mobile fuel cell technology, so we were left without expert support. And at that point, we realized our biggest challenge now is we either learn the technology, we learn how to repair it, maintain it, or we park the buses and just wipe our hands clean. So I want to thank the staff, and especially Jose, for leading the charge and developing training programs, working with some of the technology partners that were still with us, helping us out to develop our training programs. And then we started to break record after record after record. So some of the things that we did was the department, the FTA and the Department of Energy established some milestones for commercial viability for fuel cells. And also I want to acknowledge NREL, that's in the room, Leslie Udy, for helping us put together these reports along the way and learning from that data, learning from this information on and the trending that we saw. When the fuel cell engineers designed the fuel cell, they would guarantee it would only operate for 4,000 hours. That was it. They didn't expect it to operate beyond that. We achieved one fuel cell that broke the milestone of 18,000 hours, 2 years ahead of when it was predicted, when it was expected by the DOT. And then it reached 25,000 hours, which is the ultimate goal, in 2017. Today, that same fuel cell has been operating for 33,000 hours and counting, still counting. The other 12 fuel cell buses are well beyond 22. Some are already achieving 25,000 hours in the next month or two. So again, this is all new technology, and we're gonna go through growing pains, and we're gonna learn that there's some things that were predicted in engineering or testing or R&D environment that don't always pan out. And I think my word of advice is acknowledge that. Acknowledge what goes wrong. Talk about it. Don't sweep it under the rug somewhere, but take it on and be courageous enough to figure it out and get the partners to help you do that. That's the only way we're going to advance to mass deployment. And I'm sure you're going to hear a theme throughout today and tomorrow. When you have more than 2 or 3 pilot buses operating, everything changes. The dynamics change. Infrastructure has to be different. The vehicle has to be different as well. So we're very proud to be here, and now advancing into, by the summer of 2019, currently we're operating 13 fuel cell buses. By the summer of 2019, we're gonna have 10 more hydrogen fuel cell buses and 5 battery electric buses, all from the same OEM, New Flyer, operating side by side, so we can do a true side-by-side comparison in the same operating environment. And we're also going to test a 60-foot hydrogen fuel cell bus along with all those other buses. So we're pretty excited. I think by early 2020, we're going to have some pretty neat data that we can share with the industry and our partners on which technology, how each technology behaves in the field, and then what does it cost to operate and maintain it.
Odell.
Whoops, sorry. Thanks. Well, stole your thunder there.
You can give my speech.
Good morning, everyone. Kevin McDonald with Foothill Transit. Again, a pleasure to be here to represent our organization with these fine pioneers. We kind of launched our electric bus adventure, our Odyssey, back in 2010 with you probably remember the Economic Recovery Act of 2009. There was an opportunity to obtain funding from the government for shovel-ready projects. And at the time, our agency has always had innovation in our lifeblood. And so the idea of introducing something new to the LA Basin was, has always been in the forefront of our minds. So the concept of an electric bus was kind of floating around, and we found sort of a fledgling company, Proterra, who was just kind of dipping their toes into this sphere. And so we ordered, and our board really took the risk at the time of taking on this venture with this unknown entity and this unknown technology. But they wanted to do something bold, and it turned out really good for us. So we ordered the first buses in 2009. First 3 buses, they were fast charge buses. We deployed them on one of our busiest routes in our service area in the city of Pomona and Laverne. route with lots of boardings, lots of stops along the way, a couple of hospitals and schools along the route, so high traffic, a lot of wheelchair boardings. And we put the first 3 buses in service in 2010. And fortunately, you know, everything worked according to plan in terms of the propulsion system. There were some you know, little hiccups with a new bus builder along the way that weren't propulsion related, but just sort of bus builder stuff that we worked through with Proterra. But again, this was in-route charging. Those buses, you know, by design could be out essentially 24 hours a day. They'd never need to go back to the yard to be charged. They'd have a short layover while folks were boarding at a pretty busy transit center. So 6-7 minutes, the buses dock, people, you know, passengers get on and off, and the bus is back on its way. So that we kind of ran those buses, worked out all the kinks. In 2014, we ordered another 12 buses, same thing, fast charge, and we fully electrified that one line in Pomona. So that was the idea. Fully electrify one line and then branch out from there. In 2016, we ordered 2 more fast charge buses, this time 40-foot coaches. And you see the little asterisk there. Proterra wanted to get one of their original 3 buses because we got the first 3 buses that were built and sort of keep that bus on hand. So, you know, we ordered 2 buses, but we paid for one because we traded one of those 40-foot buses for one of our early 35-foot buses. So with that, we fully electrified one line, and we were able to branch out into a couple of the lines that also served that same transit center, the Pomona Transit Center, because that was key. You had to have the en-route charging. We only had the facility there in Pomona in 2014. And in 2016, again, those 2 extra buses. 2017, we procured 14 battery electric buses. And at the beginning of that process, those buses were going to be fast charge buses. So we planned to deploy those on another route in, you know, another one of our member cities in our service area. But during the process, we realized that maybe fast charge wasn't the approach we needed to take, and the extended range buses were coming online. So we changed course and went with extended range buses on that route. And those 14 buses, they're running in service right now, but not all 14 at the same time. We're still in the process of building out our infrastructure at our Arcadia facility, working with Southern California Edison, thank you, and to get that facility built out. But we've got some PCS chargers. We've got 3 PCS chargers, so we're rotating buses through to get some miles on those buses on that second route. And then also in 2017, we hit a pretty nice milestone there, putting over 1 million miles on our electric buses, and that was something that we celebrated. Our board was pretty pleased because the buses have been working fairly flawlessly through that time. And then last year, we entered into a partnership with one of our member cities. Just to tell you a little bit about our structure, we're a joint powers authority made up of 22 cities in Los Angeles County, as well as the County of Los Angeles itself. And one of our member cities has asked us to operate a circulator service in the city and using 35-foot buses. So we procured 3 35-foot buses for that service, and that service will launch in April. We've been going through route and range testing on that service over the last few weeks. And then later this year, we were pretty excited about the launch of a project that we're going to be undertaken with Alexander Dennis for 2 double-deck all-electric battery electric buses that will be deployed on the 10 corridor. And you know, in the testing that we've done so far with that particular product, not the electric bus, we've actually tested a couple diesel buses on that route, and customers are really excited just to see a double-deck bus running along the 10 corridor. So we're really hopeful that, as we get those buses out, that customers will see, as they're stuck there in traffic on the 10 freeway trying to get into downtown Los Angeles, if they see a nice double-deck, all-electric, clean vehicle that they can take into and out of Los Angeles, that they'll get on board. But again, that's been our progression from our early 3, like you said, Sal. It's easy to start with a small fleet, but then expanding from there is not always easy. It's you got to take those baby steps. But that's it.
Thank you, Kevin. All right, Simon Horton with SCE.
Good morning, thank you. Yeah, so utility is sometimes the big speed bump or the big hurdle in many people's estimation when it comes to making this transition to electric buses. And Southern California Edison is trying to, rather than be that hurdle, be a partner in this. And there's several agencies in the room right now that, as Kevin mentioned, we're working with Foothill and a couple of other agencies in the room to help make this a streamlined transition. There's a lot that the agencies can do for the utility, and obviously a lot that the utilities can do for the agencies. One of the things that we need to stress is early planning and really getting engaged with the utility early on. Southern California Edison has formed a transportation electrification group that is dedicated, has professionals that know this design work, understand the power needs, understand the infrastructure needs, so that we can help partner with you as you're making this transition. Understanding those load requests early on, understanding, how many megawatts of power are you actually going to need at your facility? Do you have a need to have a 1-for-1 charger to bus ratio, or can your route cycles and your use cycles tolerate a better ratio, 3 buses to 1 charger, or even 4 buses to 1 charger, depending on what your use needs are? Can you do a combination, like Kevin mentioned, of fast charge, but also the longer range, slower charge that doesn't impact your fuel costs as much? Remember, at that point in time, you're now looking at electricity as your fuel rather than conventional fuels. With that, what sort of load side management are you going to employ with your charging technology? Will you be employing some on-site battery storage? Will you be combining some generation, whether that's canopies with solar or other generation at your facility? All of those have an impact to how much the utility infrastructure needs to grow. And then, I think it's been mentioned a couple of times, the space constraints. You got all this equipment. It's not just the charger, it's all the other equipment that's related with that. It's transformers, it's the switch gear, it's the larger distribution switches and so on that need to have placement. If you're an agency that's out in a more rural area, that's probably not as big a concern. You've got much more space. But if you're in an urban area or you're trying to deploy some in-route charging in a space-constrained area, you want to engage your utility early on so we can figure out how to make all that fit and help work with you to maximize the space at your facilities. Edison's working on a couple of programs. A couple of agencies in the room are taking advantage of our original charge-ready transit pilot, and that's where Edison actually designs and installs all of that charging infrastructure. So it's not only the utility side piece, but we're also installing much of the infrastructure that goes on the traditional customer side piece. We've got very skilled design team in-house that knows this work very well. Some of our partner utilities throughout the state are also working on similar programs. We are just about to launch our new charge-ready transport program, which will help electrify many classes of medium and heavy-duty vehicles, but transit's a big sector in that. So we encourage you to look into that. I've got some information I can talk to you offline about. But when you're looking at that infrastructure, like I said, think about what you've got in terms of the ratio, chargers to buses. Think about, where do I have the room to place this equipment? Engage your utility to say, hey, I'm making a small transition in year 1, year 2, but my forward plans over the next 5 or even 10 years are evolving so that we can work with you to look at how do we build the infrastructure that's going to meet your ultimate needs. It'll be very challenging for both the utility and the transit agency if it's a last-minute situation. It's very difficult for a utility to dedicate circuit load. You know, if somebody comes and says, hey, we need 4 megawatts now for this facility, that's a long planning process for a utility, and we want to make sure we're doing it in an intelligent fashion that serves not only you, but also the other customers that are in that area. But those upgrades are all possible. And again, that load side piece that you're going to employ with your charging technology, again, battery storage, other things that you're going to use at your facility, they're going to help mitigate that need for huge power intake at your facilities. Many of the smaller agencies will be able to get by with a very traditional distribution feed. Some of the larger agencies or agencies that are running, you know, in the 100 buses and up may look at doing even a substation at their facility. Those are things that take a fair amount of time and planning. They're not insurmountable hurdles. It just requires time. So engaging early, I'll stress that again and again, engaging early and telling us what your plans are going to be really key to how you successfully deploy this infrastructure. Because we have a dedicated group for designing and helping deploy this, we host regular forums, regular conferences at our Edison Design Center in Irwindale. We definitely encourage you to participate in those. We encourage you to meet with some of the agencies that have done work with us before to kind of understand what they did. It's a learning curve for the utility too. So anything that we can learn from you in terms of your deployment, learn from you in terms of what infrastructure worked, what infrastructure wound up being superfluous you didn't need, so that we can help all the agencies when we do these designs for them. Ultimately, we want to make sure we're providing the power. So I'll be happy to take some questions. I know a lot of people have questions about how do I make this all work. So whether it's during the forum here or offline after the forum, please reach out to me.
Great, thank you, Simon. All right, Bill Zobel with Trillium.
Good morning. Thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here. For those of you who aren't familiar with our company, we are an infrastructure and transportation fuels provider. Trillium is owned by the Loves family of companies. So those of you that have traveled the highways and byways of the U.S. have seen the Loves truck stops. We are effectively the alternative fuels brand for the Loves family of companies. They see this coming. They're a multi-billion-dollar enterprise, the 16th largest privately held company in the U.S., about a $40 billion company. And they see the transition in transportation fuels from where we have been for many years to where we are headed. So their acquisition of Trillium a couple years ago was to try to position themselves for this and develop products that can serve the customers we have today and the customers we'll have in the future. So this forum, I think, presents an excellent opportunity for us all to get together and sort of trailblaze where we need to go for the next generation of depot charging, depot refueling opportunities for the transit space. We're a customer-focused company. We're fuel agnostic. Most of you who are familiar with us know us as a compressed natural gas, renewable natural gas company. We've evolved our product lines to include an electrification depot charging solution that incorporates the utility, incorporates battery storage, it incorporates potentially on-site generation and solar. We've got all those components we can bring to bear to provide customers cost certainty and predictability over the very long term. We've also got hydrogen solutions. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the hydrogen product that we put into place with Orange County Transportation Authority. We've had some success there. That project's due to come online in March, and again, I'll touch on that a little bit more in just a minute. I want to take 1 second just to introduce the smart people on my team. Kim Okafor, who runs our electric vehicle charging. You stand up, please, so everybody can see who you are. Kim does our EV depot charging platform. She's our line leader for that. And Ryan Erickson, who's our hydrogen business line leader for us. So if you've got really hard technical questions, they're the ones to answer that. So a little bit about kind of how we got here. Yachanda was kind enough to invite us to be part of the panel today and talk about our experience with hydrogen. She in particular wanted us to touch on how we think it scales, how it works at scale. Hydrogen's difficult to scale. I mean, you guys have had experience with that. You know a lot more about it than we do, but it's expensive. Steve had a nice chart that he showed, an illustration to show fuel cell electric buses at the front end of the curve when you don't have a lot of vehicles deployed are a little more difficult. It's expensive. But if you want to try it out, but don't expect a great refueling experience. It's going to be difficult when you're just trying out a couple of buses. But when you get to scale, what we've seen is that those operations operate well. They're very familiar with what you have today in terms of your refueling patterns. The buses fuel quickly. They're in and out of the lane very quickly. You can fuel up a very large fleet over the course of the evening, much like you do today with either gas or diesel, whatever your fuel of choice is at the moment. So very similar, and once it's at scale, it operates very well. A lot of questions around fuel supply. You know, how do we get hydrogen? It's not something you get from the local refinery or right out of the pipeline. You've got to make it. So one of the advantages that everybody experienced when we went with CNG several years ago was CNG is a product you make on site. Your ability to make your product on site like you can with hydrogen provides some cost advantages over trucked in or transported in fuels. Hydrogen can also be trucked in or transported in. It's a bit more expensive. We've got a couple of partners in the room, Air Liquide and Praxair and others, that are building hydrogen plants in or close to California that can help supply this market with additional hydrogen needs. So we expect the delivered in price of that product to drop over time. So that product will certainly be available. If you choose to do it on site and take advantage of those cost opportunities and scale, two ways to do it. SMR, which is steam methane reforming. That's a standard industrial process. It's used all over the world. It's very common. They made it available now in smaller packages that can meet a variety of needs, and it's very scalable. On a cost basis, it's about, compared to a large compressed natural gas station, for those that are familiar with that, it's about 35 to 40% more to build an infrastructure build out for hydrogen versus CNG, a similarly sized CNG site. Electrolysis is a little bit different. They're starting to deploy that now in the States. There are companies that are working on electrolysis solutions that will also scale, and those also have advantages. In terms of scaling up, as I mentioned, it's best to move to scale as quickly as you can. I'll echo Simon's points about planning. Planning is extremely important. Once you've evaluated the options and decided which way you want to go. If it's going to do hydrogen, move to scale as quickly as you can to try to get cost and scale taken care of as quickly as possible. I would certainly encourage you to do that. On the OCTA project, a very successful project for us. We've been at it now for about 12 months. It's due to come online in March of this year. I encourage anyone who's got the time to work with OCTA to go down and take a look at it. Originally they're going to roll out 10 buses with that project. It will scale to 50 with the money that was put into it up front, and it will scale easily to 150 for about another 30% of what we spent for the original facility. It'll have 3 lanes. It'll fuel a variety of different buses that I mentioned, or many buses, as I mentioned. They'll fuel up in 3 to 5 minutes for each bus, much like you have in operation today, and be very familiar from an operational standpoint. So I think with that, I'll just turn it over, and maybe we can start going through some dialogue with the audience.
Terrific. Thank you, Bill. And thank you to our panel members here for a wonderful introduction to their projects and what's been going on in the industry. We've purposely have left lots of time here for questions because you have a tremendous amount of experience up here, and would love for you to take advantage of that. And I'll tell you what, to get things started, I'll start off with a question to each of the transit agencies. So what was the biggest challenge of your first deployment project, and what were the lessons that you learned from that that you took into your subsequent projects? Sal, why don't we start with you?
All right. I wasn't here at the agency when that first deployment happened, but I did talk to, I had learned a lot from our staff, and I think most of it was just education about the technology. Obviously, when you have generations of employees that have worked there for decades that understand just diesel technology and very basic, and you tell them you're going to bring a hydrogen bus, the shock and awe kicks in. So I think a lot of it was just educating the operators, maintenance staff, and also even the board members and all the executive and managers that, this is a technology that will work and how it works. And then the other challenge was also understanding what is the right fueling mechanism that we're going to use, and then how do we also educate our first responders and some of the local officials that are going to support and provide some of the permitting that we need to build the station and what kind of station we're going to build. So I think the biggest challenge was just educating everybody on what technology we're introducing to the agency and how we're going to develop that and implement it.
Norm? Sure. Well, one thing I could say through the 5 years of our journey, buying the buses is the easy part by far. It's not like any other bus. It's the same as any other bus, I should say, as far as the procurement cycle goes. I think the biggest challenge that we had to face was, one, there were going to be challenges. So the board had to stay with us, which they have, to their credit. They could not waver. Once they made that decision, we're in, and we're completely committed. The second thing I think we also had to learn too was the fact that we had to learn what we didn't know, because as the buses, we started running the first demo buses, and we obviously we're going to go for the 100% transition. Now all of a sudden is, how do you do the depot charging? How do you do the in-route charging? How do you plan that? And every factor or every organization within the authority had to change their mindset, quite frankly. The route planners all had to change their mindset, because now you had a different type of equipment that has a capacity to it, and you now marry that with in-route charging, and how much further can you extend that capacity as far as being on the routes? Have you designed the routes appropriately? You know, with the old diesel type buses, you could run them all day, very dirty, not good for our health, but on the other hand, they gave you that affordability, so you can kind of almost get lazy, if you will. So that was a challenge. From going for grants, and Judy knows this, she had to change, and her organization had to change their mindset as to who do we go ask for the grants from the federal government? How do we tell our story of what we're trying to do? And when you're doing this for the first time, you don't always have that narrative, and she's gotten very good at sharing that narrative as to what we're doing. But those were the challenges. And also, the challenge is, you know, we're a bus company. Our sole task in life is to move people from point A to point B to point C. And you can never lose sight of that. You can get wrapped up in the technology and think you're almost like an R&D type organization. You can't forget the fact that you got to move people, and you got to do it effectively and efficiently.
Kevin?
Well, these guys just hit the nail on the head. I mean, you've got, you know, making sure your policymakers are engaged and fully supportive of what you're doing, fully engaged, informed on you know, the new technology that's coming on board. When we started, like I said, the propulsion system was a breeze. There were no issues there. Our early struggles were with a brand new OEM learning to build buses, and so, you know, working through that process. But that was you know, we got through that phase pretty quickly. You know, the challenges and going from, you know, those initial 3 on were figuring out, you know, the driver training, because on the particular buses that we're using with the overhead charging, they've got to be docked a specific way. You've got to align the buses. So driver training was an early issue that we had to get past. We had you know, missed opportunities for charging, and if you miss an opportunity for charging with a fast charge bus, you don't have a whole lot of range you can rely on. So and you know, informing customers, we wanted customers to know that they were on an electric bus. And actually, when we launched the service, we gave the service a brand new name. We called it the Ecoliner. But somehow that didn't translate to customers that they were on, you know, an electric bus, a zero-emission vehicle. And so just our marketing team getting out and making sure that customers knew what was going on so that we could bring them along on this path with us was important. I think those are probably the critical, and the price of the vehicle. Can't forget about that. You know, at that point too, and still the price of the vehicle is a big factor that you've got to consider. And I know, and you know, my experts here, you know, Roland Cordero, who runs our program, and David Reno, who is our Director of Government Relations and helps with the whole information process both up to our board and then out to the public as well. Those are critical pieces.
What questions do y'all have? Right over here.
How many hours?
I'll start on this. Roland would have all the particulars in terms of number of hours, but in terms of tooling, that was all part of the procurement process, and so the laptops with all the technology to be able to do all the diagnosis on the vehicles was included as part of the procurement. And again, as I mentioned early on, when we actually started our project with 100% federal funding, so everything was covered. The buses, the overhead chargers, the diagnostic equipment was all part of that process. We're a contracted operation, and we fortunately have willing and ready partners in our contractors, and so they were fully on board in terms of putting in what they needed to get their drivers trained. I mean, the drivers and operators trained on the vehicles. But that's been our experience. Oh, technician training.
I can help with that a little bit. The interesting part for our process was technically these 12 buses are demonstration buses, and they're not replacement buses. So originally, in the first few years, the OEMs were doing all the maintenance. Anytime something happened to the bus, we would call the OEMs to come help diagnose it, and our technicians were there to just assist. When the OEM for the fuel cell went away, then we had to figure that out. And so we really didn't start with a budget. We didn't start with, it wasn't a normal procurement process that we would do today for a replacement bus. So, but we did have to teach our mechanics how to use a laptop, which they all should know how to use one today, because if you buy a modern bus, you definitely need to have that. But when we developed our training program, we started with basic diagnostic, or basic familiarization, safety, and it's a 40-hour class. We want to make sure we go through every system, every component, and we teach them, from beginning to end how the system works, what are the do's and don'ts. Then we add another 40 hours for the fuel cell, how the fuel cell works, and then we add another 40 hours for the electric drive components and then the hydrogen storage components. And then all our mechanics are required to go through that training cycle first. Then our trainer got a great idea of having a hands-on advanced demonstration training. It's a 5-week course where they actually work with our trainer, and they do the basic PMs, they do the advanced diagnostics, and they repair the buses. And we take 2 mechanics at a time, start them off, and then halfway through we bring in another 2 mechanics in, and the mechanics that are maintaining the bus train the other mechanics, so that way they can transfer the knowledge, and we just keep cycling the mechanics through those 5 different classes. So that for us worked really well to be able to train 160 mechanics, and I think overall we've had over 247 mechanics that have sat in the class for training, and I think we're well above 15,000 hours of training. So the advice I would give today is work really close with your OEM, whoever is selling you this bus, and the other technology experts that are helping to build this bus know best on how to diagnose it. If not, help them understand. And I'm doing that today with the bus that I'm buying. And I always ask, what are the training tools that you offer? What are some opportunities that I can have so I can duplicate this training for generations to come, so our mechanics can train them? Because that is the worst thing, is when you have buses parked because your highly skilled mechanics do not know what to do.
Yeah, I would say I have 5 mechanics for 60 buses. Starting in 2020, we're going to be doing 1-for-1 replacements. I obviously don't have the staff for a trainer. Can't put people through how many hours you were talking about of training. So do you allow other agencies to come to your training?
Yes, we actually do. So I'm going to promote session 6, which I'm moderating. So stay here to the very last session, because we have a panel of experts that are going to answer all those questions for us and give you resources. Where is your property at?
I'm in the city of Fairfield, so my mechanics work on transit buses. They work on tree chippers, dump trucks, sedans. They work on everything in the city, over 700 vehicles. So of that 700 plus vehicles, 60 are transit buses. So they have to know how to work on everything.
I will make it my personal commitment to make sure you get your answers on session 6.
I won't, if that's tomorrow, I won't be here. I'm giving a presentation on tomorrow somewhere else.
All right, next question. Over here.
Have on labor. Need for more mechanics, or there's no more oil changes?
Yeah. I think I got the question. The question was related to what impact the changing technology had on labor and the need for more training and the cost implications. Is that
right? I'm considering we no longer need oil changes and things like that. A lot of those maintenance tasks disappear. So what happened to the labor that was involved in that? Was it reduced?
You're absolutely right. A lot of those, consumables just don't exist anymore. You don't have oil changes. And so we, again, I mentioned we are a fully contracted operation. We, because of our experience with the first 3 buses, we knew that there would be reduced labor requirements. And so we actually wrote into our operating agreements thresholds at which we've got, not to get too much into detail here, but our contractors bill us on a rate per revenue mile and on a rate per revenue hour. So the rate per revenue mile component has a renegotiation after certain thresholds when we increase the number of electric buses in the fleet, so that that cost per mile actually reduces for us on our contracts.
I have one more quick question for Mr. Hickling.
Yes, sir.
You said it was 1.2 charges to get down here. Was that?
Yeah, that was me being. Yeah, they had to actually charge once. We fully left Lancaster with 100% full charge, and 9 miles from Sacramento, they had to charge a little bit to get to like 35% to get into town. But on that one charge, they went about 355 miles. So.
Yeah. Hi, this is Ray Pingle with Sierra Club, and the question I have is for Bill. So fuel cell technology certainly can be a great zero-emission technology, but it depends on the fuel. And if you're burning hydrogen that's made from steam methyl reformation, the greenhouse gas production of burning that fuel is actually worse than CNG or diesel. So it's really important that that hydrogen fuel is made with renewable energy, either off the grid or even 100% renewable energy. So what is the status of electrolysis producing hydrogen and its relative, and what do you see happening as far as cost effectiveness now and in the future?
It's a good question, Ray. Thanks for bringing it up. Everything's getting, I think, less expensive as the market grows, right? We're seeing more and more competition, and competition is good, right? Everybody in this room, look at the buses that we've got out there, look at the infrastructure solutions we have to provide you the fuel. All of these have benefited the transit agencies through competition. So our ability to continue to compete, continue to drive these costs down and provide the best possible product with the most creative solution that achieves the goal of the agency, which is for us as our customer, and the goals of the state is where we're headed. We are seeing electrolysis costs coming down. There are some folks in some other sectors, in the heavy-duty trucking sector, Nikola, that has been working hard with NAL to try and bring those costs down for their hydrogen deployments across the country. And I think that'll help move the needle as well. But it's going to take operations in California and other places with fuel cell electric buses, and with the deployments of additional electrolysis units to help take that technology to the next level. I don't disagree with the renewable gas comments that you made. We will use renewable gas everywhere in California that we can. We do that today, and we continue to push that. And we use very low carbon renewable natural gas from dairy sources if we can get it. And we're continuing to build out more facilities to try to bring that gas online. But my point, I guess, here is that competition in the marketplace, using private market solutions that allow folks to compete against one another will continue to drive those costs down and the technology levels up.
Over here.
Hello. At our corporation yard is where we're going to be charging all of our future buses, and we're looking to get 48, by 2040, 48 electric buses. And one of the challenges that I'm having is to understand the above-ground utilities, their above-ground infrastructure and their spatial needs. Just because our corporation yard, everything's valuable space. So do you guys have a ballpark range of the terms of like spatial requirements for like the transformers, the panels for our charging?
So that's really dependent on the type of charging that you're going with. Basically the energy usage, the kW usage at your chargers is going to drive the volume of equipment that's necessary. And again, also looking at that ratio of chargers to vehicles. If you've got route cycles that allow you to have a strong ratio of, say, 3 vehicles to 1 charger, you can reduce the amount of equipment you have. At a minimum, when you see utility feed coming into your property, you're going to land in a large primary voltage switch. I don't want to get too technical here, but you'll land in a large primary voltage switch. From there, you can feed multiple transformers. And from each of your transformers, you will feed a switch gear, which then is the distribution panel for your charging equipment. We typically recommend that agencies look at their yard, try and look at it sort of in a radial fashion where we can centrally locate the utility equipment and then fan out in radial succession for rows of chargers. But it's really facility specific and charging equipment specific. If you tell me you're using 80 kW chargers and you've got long range buses, that's one story. If you tell me you need 300 kW chargers because you need to fast charge, it's a different story, and it tells a different story in the amount of equipment that's required.
Thank you.
Right here.
Hi, Mike Harrigan at Prospect Silicon Valley. Questions for Norm and for and the question is.
Well, for us, I believe we chose the wave inductive charging system for ours because it served our routes. It served our current transit hub areas. And that way we could go and charge, and we can make the schedule fit to those charging needs. You know, you get a 10-minute break period. Well, that time we could use to charge the bus. I mean, it worked out very, very well. As far as our long-range coaches, the ones that we're going to take and do our commuter routes going down to downtown Los Angeles, we will have a plug-in charger down there just in case one of the buses, one of the 10 or so that need those charging. In fact, as we're working with Kevin in Foothill right now to have a joint parking spot down there. That was a decision made early on based on our current route structure, et cetera, and how things were set up.
So I'm wondering about constrains your ability to make route changes.
Well, yeah, okay. In that sense, we're really careful about where we're planning. Currently we have 2 transit hubs, one in the city of Lancaster and one in the city of Palmdale that are, like in the Palmdale, that's where Metrolink, so that's not going to move, well, unless high-speed rail comes through. But even then, all that infrastructure will move with it, as we will. The hub that we have in Lancaster, that's not going to move. That's always going to be that central point that we're coming to. We know that 10, 12, 20 years out. What it has allowed us to do, though, is look at other areas that have become available to us because of using the battery electric buses that we never thought we would be able to use as a transit hub. As an example, in the South Valley area, which is a high need area that it's hard for us to serve, but we're going to make it much easier because we're going to be able to build a transit hub right next to a medical center. Now, they would have never allowed us to build a transit hub next to that medical center had it not been for the zero-emission bus. So that gave us that opportunity, but it also plays into, from our planning perspectives over the next 15 years or so, that's going to be the perfect spot to come in and do in-route charging. Another spot is in northern Lancaster at a Metrolink station. And again, that's going to let us serve the northern part of the valley. And so very strategically, serve the hospitals, be able to go to medical clinics right up to the front doors, and et cetera.
So how much charge does the bus actually get at one of these stations? I mean, is it about,
It's not a full charge. That in route would give you about another 18 to 20 miles of range. So it's just keeping it it's not degrading all the way down to zero. It's just stair stepping, if you will, and it allows you to stay out longer.
It allows you to go with a bus with a smaller onboard battery capacity, so the bus is lighter and perhaps more efficient.
Well, you don't have to add more battery, right?
Same experience for us. With our first deployment with the fast charge buses, we did the same thing. We installed the overhead chargers at the Pomona Transit Center. That's a facility that we know we're going to have access to forever. And so our route planning for those buses had to operate through that transit center. And we've got a lot of service there that's always going to be there. But we also have a lot of service that runs, commuter service that takes folks from the eastern San Gabriel Valley into downtown Los Angeles every day. And so Norm mentioned the downtown facility that we're working on for parking and midday charging of vehicles there. And so for those, for that application, the extended range vehicles is what we need. So we're not really keen on multiple sub-fleets of vehicles, but that's really what, for our particular situation, it works. The fast charge buses on those particular routes that run through the Pomona Transit Center work, and for our commuter service, the extended range buses are what we need.
Back over here.
Oh, on the AVTA story, I was reading that it sounds like when you first started embarking on it and first started talking with the utility, that there was obviously challenges there, and whether or not the utility was able to provide the kind of power that you needed. It sounded like you guys had to come up with a load management scheme on the chargers and able to move the project forward. Can you kind of share a little bit more with that? And I was curious what chargers you guys landed on. Were they 80 kW or 200 or?
They were 80, 100, right? 80 and 200. So yeah, I think there's, 43 80s and the rest of them are 200. Okay. To answer that part of the question. One of those things that you don't know going into this is all the partnerships that you're really going to need. And again, this is going back 4 years now, and at the time it was all brand new. Mark and his team did an incredible job of working with Southern California Edison and to Southern California Edison. They had to learn also because we had to go through and different design iterations. You're bringing in so much amperage that you can't charge all the buses the same level at any time. So you had to have a HAMS, they call it, a management system that the buses that were lower in state of charge would get charged faster because to go out and do the service deliveries. The other ones that came in with a higher state of charge would get a little less charge at that time to manage the amount. But bringing in the infrastructure was a critical design feature that we had to and hurdle to overcome. We have open trenches now because that was a heat management process was you got so much amperage coming through, how are you going to manage that heat? And so there's open trenches in our yard now that have covers over them, but to allow to dissipate that heat. So it was just a step-by-step iterative process. Try one thing, that doesn't work, step back, try something else, step back. But it was a partnership. Truly, that's how the answer got solved.
On the AC Transit, just one quick question on the fuel cell. I'm just curious, have you seen any degradation on the cell stack? Is there?
Yes, we have. Actually, when the vehicles first arrived, they were spec'd to operate at about 220, maybe 300 miles range depending on how the vehicle's driven. Currently today, we're operating them on routes that are about 180 to 190 because we have seen a little bit of the degradation. It's not extreme. They're still out there operating, but that's a natural thing that's going to happen not only to the fuel cell, but also the batteries that are on the bus.
On the subject of batteries, what do you expect for the replacement point? I'm thinking like, you know, a privately owned vehicle, maybe 7 years out of a battery pack, and it's a pretty expensive replacement. How do you figure that for your buses? Do you work with the OEM? Do you need special equipment to take? About how much does that battery pack weigh, and could a conventional forklift take it out, or something about the equipment side, and also just the replacement strategy? You know, for a 20-year bus, that might be 3 replacements.
We don't know yet. And, you know, that's one of the things. We've actually seen some pretty positive results on our early buses. You know, we've seen very little degradation in battery capacity and the battery performance. It's you know, we anticipated we would need to do a battery replacement around 7-8 years. Those early buses that we got in 2010 are still rolled in a little over 90% capacity still. So we still have a long way to go. But that data that we're gathering is going to help us as we plot out, okay, at what point do we need to do battery replacements? But we're not quite at a point where we have the answer to that question yet.
Have you had any failures? Have you had any failures where you've had to take one out, and how does that process work?
Have not had any failures.
We've had one. But also then our manufacturer has also then been backing up, and so they guaranteed our batteries for 12 years. So that was part of our contract going into it. So that was a big deal.
And that's a very good question, but I think the answer is yet to come. And because we want to operate these vehicles minimum of 12 years, 500,000 miles. I don't know that we've had one reach that yet. So the technology will prove itself over time, but the OEMs are engaging and understanding that we are going to have to consider that question. We actually had an opportunity where, because our program is grant funded, we were able to remanufacture the battery packs. So we removed them with a forklift. We had a spare one that we could use, so we would send the old one to the OEM. They remanufacture, send it back. So there's creative ways of addressing that. I think the true assessment is going to be how long do they really just last on their own. We may not have to replace them.
I have a question for Simon. Simon, a lot of the agencies here may not be in the SCE service area, and they may not be thinking as far along as SCE is with respect to rate schedules or your make-ready program. What suggestion or recommendation would you have for those transit agencies to engage their local utility on those two issues?
Start yesterday. Yeah, you want to engage with the utility as soon as possible. The large utilities in the state, the large regulated utilities, we all have similar make-ready programs to Edison's charge-ready program. So I encourage you to look into those opportunities and engage with the utility as soon as possible. So as part of your planning in-house, while you're looking at your transition planning, make that utility outreach an absolute first step in that. Many of you will find you need to do a phased approach with your utility upgrades. You may be able to, as you pilot, let's say you're piloting a handful of buses early on, you may be able to take advantage of existing infrastructure, and your utility can help assist with that. While you're looking at that longer range planning of that 5 or 10 year build out to when you've made a complete conversion of your fleet. But early engagement is the most important part.
And Bill, question for you. So one of the largest barriers for hydrogen is the cost of the fuel itself. Currently it's quite high. And you mentioned that there's several initiatives to build out capacity within the state. How long do you think it will take before hydrogen fuel becomes more cost competitive with other technologies?
That's always been the $64 billion question, right? When's hydrogen going to become cost effective and how does it work? You know, scale helps, right? Initiatives like this that help move the market forward help. They're driving production, the announcements by the large industrial gas companies to put in facilities to supply hydrogen to the state, I think signal their readiness to make investments in the marketplace. What doesn't help is uncertainty, right? And there's a lot of regulatory uncertainty out there right now, a lot of things that we're not sure about. You guys have to make decisions to operate your transit agencies, and the timeline doesn't give you a lot of time to think about this, right? So I think the best suggestion I can give folks with regard to that and planning, you know, to second your motion here, to get in front of people quickly, whether it's a private market solution, whether it's a utility solution, providing certainty for yourselves in terms of what your rates are going to be long-term, how you get that. You know, the PG&E bankruptcy, who knows what that means to this marketplace, right? I mean, anybody that had a contract with PG&E, and we've got several, they're all up in the air now, right? A judge can, with a stroke of a pen, can make that contract go away. Rates can change any day, any time, as soon as conditions change in the marketplace. So when you do your planning, when you think about long range and how you're going to set up your facilities, whether it be hydrogen, whether it be electric or some other technology, think about certainty, think about long range planning. Your buses, you want them to last 12, 15 years, right? You need to be thinking down the road and how to do that. Hydrogen costs will certainly come down, I think, as more of that infrastructure and production capacity gets deployed. Technology will continue to improve, but gaining long-term certainty, long-term contracts, things that are consistent and won't change, I think is very important.
All right. Yep.
I just wanted to mention one thing about rates. And in one of the sessions tomorrow, Damon Hanneman from Edison will be speaking, and he'll be able to address electricity rates in greater detail. But Edison just rolled out some new rates that apply to the commercial space. The one nice thing is to help adopt or help encourage adoption of electrification. We've removed the demand charges for the first 5 years of these new rates, and then it progressively comes back in, but comes back in at about 60% of what the current demand rate is now. So that's going to be a big help, and some of the agencies may have already been able, and may discuss this at other forums about how they've been able to take advantage of various credits and rate pricing. And then to go along with that, Edison will offer rate analysis for your facility. So some of the other utilities may do something similar, where we can help model your usage and then give you an idea of what those rates will look like over time.
All right, there was a question here in the middle.
This is a question for Kevin. Could you define what an range extended bus is? And also, is it considered as a zero-emission bus under the ICT regulation?
Our extended range buses carry about 440 kilowatts of power, so that gets us 160, 170 miles today. You know, we're hoping to get to a point where we can get some more battery storage on board. And you know, as we look to the OEMs and the builder, the accessories, if we can get less draw that's not used for propulsion on those batteries, then that helps extend our range. But right now we're at about 160, 170 miles of safe range on those buses, and they're fully battery electric. So yeah, there's no emissions. Where the electricity comes from, fortunately, Edison has a pretty green portfolio of energy. So we're looking at green all the way.
So after 160 miles, it will be diesel powered?
No, there's no other propulsion on board, just batteries. Yeah, it's all battery. Yeah.
Well, all right. We've got time for one question, and as the moderator, I'm going to take that liberty. So the current state of zero-emission bus technology, I kind of liken it to where cell phones are, or were in the late 90s. So we're at the flip phone stage for zero-emission bus technology. What do you think is needed? What kind of advancements are needed from your suppliers, your bus manufacturers, the charging manufacturers? What advancement do we need in order to assist you make that transition to full fleet, full electric fleet?
From a standpoint for AVTA, I would say a little more flexibility in range. And that battery technology is changing. And to use your cell phone analogy, I mean, obviously you saw the bricks that we used to have. I'm old enough to remember the big brick cell phones down to what we carry today. So, you know, if it progresses at that same rate, and as we can, extend range another 10%, 20%, 30%, it just provides the transit agencies that much more flexibility and options to provide service to their customers.
Sal?
Yeah, I think I would advise the infrastructure and bus manufacturers and even utility providers, don't think about the current contract for 5 or 10 buses. Think about mass deployment and start innovating in that direction. I think we're all there and really build a partnership. And this goes for transit agencies too. We have to be patient to understand that just because we agreed to something and it doesn't pan out right, we don't want to turn our backs to each other. But we got to start thinking of 200 buses per yard, 100 buses per yard. How does this all integrate? How does the charging infrastructure talk to the bus, talk to the schedules that are programmed into that bus, talk to the utility infrastructure? How do we figure out how they're all going to operate and what ties it all together? There's a lot of innovation that is happening already. And then the other thing that worries a transit operator is I buy something today, just like a cell phone. It's extinct by next year. We don't want to do that. We have to operate that vehicle for 12 years. And that charger we put in today needs to work on that charger the 14th year when we buy another bus, right, to replace that first bus we purchased. Same with the fueling infrastructure. So that's the challenge that we want to resolve.
Standardization is something that the utilities are really trying to push. And it was a comment over here about somebody that has an agency that you're not only running transit buses, you're also running other equipment. And as you make that transition to electrification, do you have standardized equipment that can run buses and other equipment? Do you have equipment that you've installed in year 1 and you change OEMs in year 5? Does that equipment work when you've changed OEMs? So really driving those standards is huge.
All right, Kevin, you get the last word.
The battery technology issue is really key. You know, more efficiency on that battery, and you know, not to beat the cell phone analogy to death, but you know, you've got tons of apps draining your battery, and it's the same thing on the bus. If you've got a lot of this auxiliary load draining your battery, you're not going to get the range that you need. And so, you know, we've got to get that other drawdown on the vehicles.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank our panel, Norm Hickling, Sal Yamas, Kevin McDonald, Simon Horton, and Bill Zobo. Excellent job, gentlemen. Thank you so much.